Hello and welcome to the second episode of Tailoring in Conversation. In this series, I'll be interviewing tailors from all around the globe to gain a better insight into their worlds. My guest for today is Claire Emerson. Now, you may know Claire from her years at Edward Sexton, or you may have seen her work on Instagram. She's currently working as a freelance tailor, and so if you've recently commissioned anything from Gives and Hawkes, Tom Sweeney, Dobrick and Lawton, Livingston and Sons, chances are that she was the artisan behind your jacket or waistcoat. During our conversation today, we'll be talking about her journey into tailoring, her apprenticeship, and the transition into freelance work. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Claire. Welcome, and thank you so much for making time. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I've been exceptionally busy, but I'm hoping
Yeah.
over the next few months, with things starting to go back to normal, it will smooth out a bit, and I'll have some more free time.
Okay. Now, when you say back to normal, do you mean that, we're away from COVID, like well away from COVID, or back to normal as in you've had a very busy period and it's been abnormal for you and you're trying to balance that out?
Um, I wouldn't say me being busy is abnormal, but I've definitely felt the pressure a lot more since the tailoring shops have reopened.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
so I'm hoping. I think there's been a massive influx of customers because obviously they've had nowhere to go and spend their money for the last however long.
Yeah,
And they have important dinners and stuff to go to. So,
sure.
yeah, I think they've just swamped the tailors. And in return,
Mm.
I've been a bit overwhelmed recently, but not in a bad way. It's been good to be busy again after the quiet period during lockdown.
Okay, well, I can imagine. Claire, before we kind of dive into what you're currently doing, there is something I want to know. Who was Claire? Who was the 10-year-old Claire?
A 10-year-old me. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Um, 10-year-old Claire, she was into sports. I used to be into football.
Okay.
Uh, I used to do horse riding. I did that for
Right.
quite a long time. I was always more into like cars and Action Man and things like that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
um, yeah, I don't. I think I'm still quite similar in some ways, and
Mm.
yeah, it's a difficult question to ask because it was answered because it's quite a long time ago. But
Yeah.
she was very creative as well. Like she liked
Mm.
drawing and painting and anything like that. And yeah, anything my dad used to do, he used to get me involved as well. So whether it was up on the roof working like on the tiling or in
Yeah.
the loft replacing the insulation or anything really, he used to get me involved. So I grew up with the attitude of I can do anything, I just need to learn how to do it first.
Okay. Okay. Would you say that most of the things you're interested in were because of your environment and the influences you had from your peers, your family, your parents? Or was it something that you felt from within and you were like, man, that action man thing, I need to have that?
Well, I don't know. I think it's probably both because obviously your family have a huge impact on you and who you turn out to be. But yeah,
Yeah.
I was always more interested. Like my sister would have like Barbies and stuff like that, and I was always into like my brother would play with cars and Action Man, and I'd be like, this is way cooler than Barbie. So
Okay, okay. Did you, because you say you did football as well and you did horse riding.
yeah.
So, were you doing that because you had some sort of just like, you just wanted to be active and you had a lot of energy, or was there something like uh, a competitive drive behind it as well? Like, I want to show what I'm doing. I want to make a mark. How was that for you?
I think for me it's movement. I've always been really
Mm,
into physical things, and just it has such a huge impact on your mental health as well, like being able to go out and do sports and stuff like that. And
yeah.
obviously there is some competitiveness to it, but it was more like participating and experiencing new things really that drove me
Mm,
into things like that. And even to this day I always like, I think that's what appeals to me about tailoring as well. It's a movement based job. You're not sitting at a desk all day. You're constantly moving around, and
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's one of those things that's kind of transferred from like everything that I've done as I've grown
Hmm.
up. It's just something. It's been a key part of everything I've been involved in.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. Well, okay, well, everybody I think in the tailoring industry so far that I know of knows you. So, what I don't know is how do you go from football to horse riding to action man to helping your dad, on something that you're doing on the roof there, to tailoring? Was that like a natural evolution, or was it like something happened to you and you're like, whoa, this is a new discovery?
Well, I did art at school,
Okay.
and it was kind of natural for me art and sport, obviously.
Mm.
It was kind of natural for me to progress into one or the other, and I really enjoyed art. So I went to Ravensbourne and did a foundation year where you kind of covered like all the bases. There was like
Yeah,
fashion, design, everything.
yeah.
And then after I knew I wanted to do something creative, but I didn't know what.
Mm.
And my friend actually told me about the Newham tailoring course, which I went along to just
Oh,
ran.
right. So you did Newham as well.
Yeah, you're a fellow
Okay, okay,
Newhamer.
okay. I mean, what year was that when you did Newham? 1970.
It seems like it. It must have been. Oh my goodness. I think I was 19, and
Okay.
so like, I don't know. I think it might have been before that. I'm trying to think. This is why it's good to have LinkedIn, because you can go back and be like, this is the date I did
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
It's well over 10 years ago, we'll put it that way.
Okay, okay. That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah. So I started there, and
Mm.
I loved it, and I didn't know how to sew or anything, but
Yeah.
I was determined to learn how to do it, and like seeing the end result of what you could produce, it just, I don't know, it just kind of hooked me, and I was just like,
Right.
that's what I want to do. So
So were there other like did you have an idea that you would like tailoring, or was it like, look, there are a couple of crafts, I'm just going to try some of them, see what happens? And is that how it went?
yeah, that's basically how it went. It's been like that with most things for me, like even trying new sports and stuff like that. It's kind of, something sparks my interest, and I think, okay, I'm going to pursue
Yeah.
this for a while, and I'll
Yeah.
see where I end up. I might enjoy it, I might not, but at least I can say I've tried it and I know for sure.
Yeah. So what was it specifically about tailoring that you were like, I can do this for a living. I'm comfortable doing this for a living.
I think it's the creativity, and like I said before, it's the movement as well. It's just having the freedom, and
Mm.
it, it's it's almost my need for perfection as well drives me. I want to improve, so
Okay. So you're a perfectionist as well.
I am, but I'm working on not being so much of a perfectionist, because it can drive you to destruction. So I'm trying to
Yes.
find a healthy
Yes.
balance currently.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that it is a wise thing to do. So you do Newham, and then obviously after Newham, you're thinking of, well, I may be able to do this for a living. So how can I do this more professionally? How did that process go from student to perhaps you did an apprenticeship you mentioned. So
Mhm.
how did it go from student to apprentice, from apprentice to freelance code maker, which you are doing now?
So when I finished Newham, I had
Mm.
made some contacts on Savile Row, because you spent a few days there each month. So I actually went to one of those contacts and said, "Look, what do I do now? I know I want to be a coat maker. How do I get
Mm.
into it?" So he sat down with me and he gave me a list of tailors to send my CV and a cover letter to,
Yeah.
and he suggested Edward, and I didn't know who Edward was. I'm not gonna
Okay.
lie. So
Yeah.
I sent them all out, and Edward was the first person to get back to me.
Yeah. And
And
for the viewers who are listening, you mean Edward Sexton, right?
yes, Edward Sexton.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so he kind of, I asked him who Edward was and his background, and he said to me, like go for it, if you can
Yeah.
get this. This is where you want to work. So I went along on one of like the hottest days of the year and tried to play it cool. Like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing here. And so we had a good chat, and he asked
Yeah.
me if he actually kind of caught me out as well, because he said to me, "Do you know who I am?" And I was just like, no. Which is the last thing you
Yeah.
want to say, because you want to look like you're prepared for it.
Yeah,
And
definitely. Yeah.
yeah, we got on well, and he said, just like, go away, have a look and see what I've done and see if it's something you'd be interested in. So
Yeah.
yeah, I started there, and then I was there for 10 years. I went from
Okay.
being apprentice to having my own apprentices, and
Mhm.
then I finally decided to branch out on my own, set up a workshop, and work for myself, be my
Okay.
own boss.
Okay. How did you find the difference between being a student who, just does a bit here and there, into going into a workshop where there is like real money and real clients involved and like real mistakes, they really shock you, and also having some sort of, at the time, pressure that every tailor probably faces. Um, was that kind of like a shock? How was that? How did you process that transition?
Yes, I would say at the start it was a shock, because when you're in education, they say to you, oh, this isn't quite right, but you need
Mm.
to do it this way. Whereas when you go into tailoring, is this is wrong, and you're an idiot, it should be done this way. So,
Right, right.
and also you have, like you said, you have time frames to work for as well. So yes,
Yeah.
you're trying to learn, but you're also under a lot of pressure to get it done right for
Mm.
within that time frame. So yeah, it went from being a really relaxed learning environment to like a
Mm.
quite a stressful, but in some ways I kind of thrived in that environment, because I'm quite a stubborn person. So if I
Right.
can't do something, it's just going to push me more. If I've set my mind on something, nothing's
Yeah.
going to stop me. So
Yeah. Yeah.
even though it was a struggle to transition between the two, I did enjoy it.
Okay, well, it's interesting you mentioned like you're stubborn, and if you can't get something, you have to do it until you get it right. In that transition period where you were kind of like, okay, this is the real deal now. Obviously, you get a lot of pressure. Some of them you don't even expect. You don't know, for example, that you're going to be working till like 8 o'clock, maybe 9 o'clock, and you're like, oh, can I have the keys for the workshop? Can I, things like that.
Mhm.
Was there any moment that you thought, I'm still in the beginning of this. I haven't committed fully. This is like not what I expected. I'm gonna consider maybe doing something else. I don't think this is for me. Like, this is too much pressure. This is too much, like, because tailoring is labor intensive as well. Your neck is gonna hurt. Your back is gonna. That you thought like, no, this is not what I expect. Was there any difficult moment that you're like, maybe not for me?
No, I don't think that thought ever occurred to me. It was more the fear of not being good enough,
Mm,
um, and
okay.
that's more of a confidence thing. But I never thought for one second it wasn't what I wanted to do. I just
Right.
hoped that one day I would be good enough to do it if I was persistent and tried hard enough.
Okay, so you felt somewhat like, I'm comfortable here. I just need to learn the skills, need to speed up, need to do this, and then I will be able to just kick ass with this.
Hopefully, yeah, that was my
Yeah,
intention.
yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. So you were there for like 10 years. How was your apprenticeship? Like, what was the structure of the apprenticeship? What was it like? You work a lot on small pieces that you can make a lot of mistakes on, or were you like thrown into like the ocean and be like, hey, make up this 4 part with like 5 pockets in it and do the linings like this and then figure it out on your own? How was kind of like the structure you had there?
To be honest, like it was good for most of like the beginning and the middle.
Mm,
It was like, okay, you need to learn how to sew, so you're going to sit here until your back aches and
yeah,
you've got dead legs and your fingers are sore. But at the end of those 6 months, you're going to be able to sew. So just keep
yeah,
going. And I'd practice in my spare time as well to try and advance a bit further the next time I was at work, so I wouldn't be stuck doing the same thing. But
yeah.
it was like, okay, you've done that, so here's some imbras. This is how, like, they showed me how to do them. And then it was like,
Mm,
okay, so until these are good, you're not going on to the next stage. So It would
Right,
just
right.
be practice, 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 practice. And then it's not until, like, even up to learning collars, like facings and collars, like a lot of instructions. And then at the end,
Mm.
it got to sleeves, and it was like, okay, here's a pair of sleeves. They need to look like this. Go and do them.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
you're just like, sorry, what?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I can imagine how that goes. Well, did you have other apprentices around you that were like at the same level as you, or were you the only apprentice at that time?
Uh, so it was just me and Henry who was teaching me, and then
Yeah,
later on we took on a few apprentices. So then I could pass on what I had learnt to them, and then it
right.
could take those jobs from me, and I could learn the next stage. So it's kind of like a continuous chain of learning.
Ah, okay, okay. So you
Works really
learned
well.
something. It does work well.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Would you say that that was if that wasn't there, that maybe it took longer for you to kind of like get to where you wanted to, or was it did not make a difference?
Yes, definitely, because obviously you have the tailor at the top, and he's going to be doing the last bits of the last stages of the jacket. And
Right.
if it was just me at the bottom, I would have just been swamped with in-breast, lapels, machining
Right.
up line, all the beginners jobs. I wouldn't have been able to progress onto the next stages. So having
Mm.
those apprentices, it was kind of key.
Okay. This is a very interesting part because what you're saying essentially is that you need to have multiple apprentices because otherwise one apprentice is kind of like just repeating the maybe the first half of the jacket, which is like the less complex and difficult parts, although
Mhm.
those are also difficult. But then if that apprentice keeps on just repeating those things and just the master tailor does the rest, they won't, well, it takes them a lot longer to go there. So probably it's like a good idea for shops to have multiple apprentices.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. In
Yeah, yeah.
reality, the master tailor's not going to turn around and go, "Do you know what? I'm going to pad lapels for the next month, so you can move on to the next stage." Can you imagine any environment where that would happen?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that would be the end of the world, probably. Okay, okay. Well, so yeah, because most of the tailoring houses, they have a capacity, and they don't like to take on too many new apprentices. But it seems that it's beneficial for the apprentices to have other apprentices. So if there
Yeah,
are apprentices out there that think like, I want to be the only apprentice because then I have no competition, what you're essentially saying is like, no, it is actually good because then you guys can move on together and kind of like just shift tasks and continue the progress.
yeah. Well, competition first of all is healthy. If you don't have competition, then you'll never improve.
Mm.
There'll be no drive to improve. So
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's really important. But also, you can learn from the people that you've just taught to do what you were previously doing, and like it's a continuous circle of learning. Really,
Mm.
and that way you learn to work as a team, and you can pass the skills on. But they can, like, as I said, like you can learn from them too. So. You,
Yeah.
you need to be in an environment where there is competition, but not unhealthy competition.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
like maybe you see someone do something differently and it turns out really nicely, and you go, oh, like
Mm.
that's interesting, like why does yours look like that and mine looks like this, and you can have a discussion about it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
because obviously if there's unhealthy competition, it can cause some really bad
Yes.
negative
Yeah. Okay.
workshops.
Well. Here's the thing. I think you have plenty of experience being an apprentice, also working in house, working freelance. For anyone who would want to enter a workshop, let's say, as an apprentice, and they want to know whether things are going well for them, or like there is plenty of good competition, or there is even bad competition, how would you define that? Like, how would someone know, okay, I'm in an environment where there is bad competition and I should probably think twice before staying here? How would you kind of like describe that?
I think I mean, having experienced some of it, it can affect your confidence massively.
Right.
And if you're going home feeling like you're not good enough and you're
Hmm.
never going to be good enough,
Yeah.
then maybe it's a toxic environment you're working in because people aren't encouraging you.
Okay.
Um, So maybe that would be something to
So
reflect upon.
encouragement is definitely key. Like if you never hear any words of encouragement, then you should probably see some red flags if they're not there already.
Yeah, obviously there's, if you're not putting any effort in and you're
Yeah.
making loads of mistakes and you're making holes in things, then there is a reason why you're getting negative feedback. But if you're trying your hardest and you're giving it everything,
Yeah.
and others around you, you can see you're like producing the same work as others around you, but it's just negative outcomes the whole time, then
Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely red flag there.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a very good thing, because um, I think most people who do go into a workshop, and our industry has, and the fashion industry is kind of like notorious for a lot of people doing work experience, but then eventually maybe not getting the job, or their apprenticeship is delayed for way too long, and they're like, they've been apprentice for like 10 years, so it's like, oh, it's going to look good on your CV, but why don't you just keep on padding colors or something like that. um, and so what you're saying is an essential thing. Now, um, obviously, once you do become a competent tailor and you're like a pro, and the cutters and the people trust you with the client's work,
Mhm.
everybody knows that there has to be some sort of a structure to your approach to work. And this is an area that most tailors develop later on as they are working. So like everybody has a system for their own. Like some
Yeah.
people start with, I've heard like someone makes an entire half of the jacket and then goes into the other half. It's like they start twice on the same, right? You know who I'm talking about, I think. So that's one system. But then you also have people, who kind of like use pocket makers, or they do this first or that first. When you were going through your apprenticeship, were you shown like the different techniques and the different steps outside of the context of the system, or were you actually taught a system and you just reproduced that system? How did you kind of like go around that? Because they're like, yeah, you need to learn the basic things that are just all separate from the whole, but then
Mhm.
eventually you also need to figure out for yourself, okay, what is going to make me the most efficient person in this workshop or in this kind of like environment? Tell me a little bit more about that, because I think that's a very interesting part to talk about.
Well, I was taught one system,
Mm,
and I had to follow that system.
right.
So once I had finished, I kind of then thought, okay, like this is the way I've been taught, but I
Yeah.
know it's not necessarily the only way that you can do things. So I then started to experiment, and it was trial and error and seeing what worked and what didn't really.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I progressed, and even now I still challenge what I do, and I go, I
Mm,
think every so often I've done this way for quite a long time, and is it necessarily the most efficient way, and
mm,
does it have the best outcome? Are there possibly other ways I could be looking into to produce this? So yeah, I do feel though that to have a starting system is kind of key, because
mm.
it's so vast what you're learning that you need
Yeah.
to kind of have steps to follow. But um, once you're ready to step outside of those areas, you can. But that's another thing I was always taught. It was as you go along, you need to
Mm,
be thinking 2-3 steps ahead every single time, because
right.
the actions that you take now are going to affect the job later down the line. So it was learning how to process all that in my mind as I'm
Mm,
working, and constantly be thinking about other things down the line as well, and what the
right.
outcome's going to be if I do something slightly differently. So I
Mm,
still use that now. It's like, okay, if I change this way of doing something, what's going to happen like 3 steps down the line? And sometimes I change stuff and I go, oh, well, that didn't work. And
okay.
then
Yeah.
sometimes it's like, oh, okay, like that works a lot better. But
Yeah.
I was also lucky as well, because I had other tailors come in, and then they would be working on
Mm,
something, and I'd just be like, oh,
right.
can I just watch you do that? So I just stand there, watch them do that, and probably annoy them with all the questions I was asking.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then I'd go away and be like, okay, so this person does it that way. maybe I can incorporate the two together.
Right, right. And when you think of something like, oh, maybe I should try something new, or maybe I should merge these two steps, or like replace the steps with something else, do you do that even when things are going well, or do you only do that when things go wrong and you're like, okay, I need to rethink this part of what I'm doing now for the future, or whatsoever? How do you kind of like decide I need to try something new while you already have a working system?
I think it's more if I'm doing something and I'm not 100% happy with it,
Hmm.
I'll then start to reflect upon it and go, okay, something here needs to change. I don't have the answer right now, and I need to try
Right.
out a few different ways. But it's
Yeah.
just it is trial and error. But if
Hmm.
I then see, this is where Instagram's quite good as well, because you can see other
Yeah.
people's work. And if
Yeah.
I then see even something that I'm happy with, if I see someone that does something different and I go, oh, like that could actually work more efficiently or better than the way I do it, even if I'm happy with the way I'm doing it, I will then give their way a try and then see where I end up. Really, I might end up like merging the two, like I said before. And
Yeah.
also, I have quite a few tailors that I talk to on a regular basis. So obviously, if you're not in tailoring, it's quite a boring discussion to be having. But just like talking about velvet facings and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I do it this way. How do you do it? And then it's like, oh yeah, I tried it once this way and it didn't work. So it kind of
Yeah.
there's so many ways to learn. You've just got to be really open though. You can't just be like,
Mm.
okay, I've learned it now. I don't need to learn anymore. My way works and it's the only way.
Mm.
There's so many ways to get the same outcome, and you just need
Yeah.
to try some of them.
Yeah. Would you say that one of the things that, well, how should I phrase this? One of the things that makes you a real tailor is you having had enough time to not only learn that system that you were taught originally, but you also had enough time to evaluate new things and kind of like shuffle things around and be like, look, I not only know one system, I know like maybe three systems or 10 compartments of different systems. And so I've had enough time to kind of like let that just boil a little bit until it's kind of like matured, let's say.
I think time is key. Like I think I think my coat making apprenticeship lasted about 5 years in total, which is slightly
Right.
longer. But it wasn't it wasn't just coat making. I learned a lot of other things in that time as well. So
Hmm.
I had the time I needed to develop, and that's important because I don't think something like tailoring is something you can just rush and just hope that you're going to pick it up really quickly as you go along. It's something that you need to develop at your own pace.
Yeah. What sort of other things apart from tailoring did you kind of like learn that are very, I mean, I guess if you work anywhere, you learn things aside from the actual profession, the technical part. But were there things that you thought like, if I know tailoring but I don't know this, then I can't be a tailor?
Um, that's actually a good question. Um, I think I it was good to learn about the different types of fabrics because obviously they
Huh.
influence my work a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but also it was I learned how to it kind of gave me more focus in a way because with Edward I learned how he runs the business and I saw that side
right.
of it and like how much everything costs and how you keep the business running. And I also got
Mm,
to meet the customers and deal with the customers, and so
mm,
I learned lots of different bits here and there all related to tailoring. They didn't necessarily affect how I make the jobs, but
yeah,
it was important for me to see all those things and like even watching Edward cutting and things like that.
yeah,
It was all areas that I tried out and areas I thought, no, I'm still on the right path. I want to be a coat maker. And like
mm,
whilst I was there, he showed me how to do like trousers and waistcoats and skirts, and
right.
there were like really random things I ended up working on. So yeah, it's kind of it was really vast, but
Yeah,
it all paid off in the long run.
yeah. No, I can perfectly imagine. So you did your apprenticeship for 5 years, you said, and then you carried through for another 5 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
What did you learn in the next 5 years after once your apprenticeship was done? Was it just like a case of fine-tuning what you were taught and what you had learned, or were there specific things that you can only learn once you've got the basics out of the way?
So after I finished, I moved on to teaching more apprentices, which obviously helped me as well because that helped me improve my tailoring. But
Right. How did that do? How did it help you? How did it? Yeah. How did teaching others help you to improve your tailoring?
well, it gave me different perspective on the way I do things, and
Right.
therefore I could kind of try out new ways as well. Like if I had someone that I was teaching, because everybody learns so differently,
Yeah.
so my way of teaching didn't always necessarily work. So I had to try new ideas and try out
Yeah.
different methods and see if it worked for them. And also I benefited massively from teaching them too. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was it worked out really well. But I think at the end of your apprenticeship, I don't know if it was the same case for you, but
Mm.
it's the last stage is the sleeves, and you're kind of just thrown into it.
Yeah.
Everything else has been so precise and detailed, and then it's just
Yeah.
it literally like, oh, here's a pair of sleeves, like they need to look good, and you need to go away and do them.
Why do you
Um,
think that is? Why do you think that this, like, hey, we're going to show you every single detail of how to make, let's say, a facing or a pocket, but when it comes down to sleeves, just go ahead and do it, please. Don't bother us. Why is that, you think?
I think a lot of it is to do with um, a lack of teamwork. I think
Right.
it's the people cutting them don't always necessarily know how to base them in and to sew them in
Mm,
and to
right.
make them look good, and therefore sometimes there's a lack of communication.
Yeah.
um, it's it's quite difficult though.
No, I.
I think, yeah, it's just there's definitely a lack of communication there, and if people worked together a lot
Mm.
more, then everyone could benefit a lot from it.
It's a very fine thing you say, communication. Do you? Because I've experienced this before, where it's like you hear tailors say, "Oh, this cutter has been giving me sleeves for like 10 years. I've made them look good, and the cutter thinks they can cut really nice sleeves, whereas it was me kind of like fixing the problems." Like, but it's a funny thing. But I've heard that from like so many tailors that
Yeah.
it just seems to be like one of the realest things, at least here in the UK's tailoring industry. But I've heard it from like Italian tailors, I've heard it in Russia, like anywhere. So when it comes down to communication, well, first of all, do you think how much communication do you think there should be between the cutter and the tailor, or do you think that if the cutter just does everything according to how the tailor would make it, everything would go well? Or do you think no? Regardless of the greatness of the pattern and the greatness of the tailor, there should still be communication? Or what's your take on that?
Ideally, I think you need to work really closely with the cutter.
Right.
You can't have an amazing end product if there's no communication. And
Mm.
everyone I work with now, like I communicate with them, and if I have a problem, I tell them, and I always say to them, if there's anything you want me to do differently, please let me know. Like, I can
Yeah.
take criticism as long as it's
Mm.
constructive. I can
Yeah.
take criticism all day. So
Yeah.
I just think there's a real boundary there between,
Mm.
like, not with me in my current situation, but there seems to be a real boundary there between tailors and cutters and sleeves. And
Mm.
I don't know if it's a pride thing or I
Right.
mean, at the end of the day, sleeves are difficult. If you
Yeah.
have an eighth here or there,
Mm.
it can ruin a sleeve, and there's so much to take into consideration. But people like David, he's really good because he based in his own sleeves. Like, he
Yeah.
does try out his own sleeves, and that's why his sleeves fit. And like Andrew, he like when he gives me sleeves, I have about 5 notches to match. So I know that he's gone over every inch of that sleeve and he's checked it to make sure it fits in the armhole.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I just think I think that for some reason there is a massive boundary there, and because of that, there's a serious lack of communication about sleeves.
Yeah, yeah.
But then also, I've heard of cases where tailors have said this sleeve doesn't work, and the
Right.
cutter just assumes that it's the tailor's fault. But
Right.
then I'm also sure it goes both ways. So
Yeah.
I think it's people's pride, and yeah, it's just it's a real boundary that somehow people need to get through. But I mean, you just have to be open-minded and you have to be prepared to communicate. And unless people are willing to do that, it's not going to improve.
Do you think that it is essential for a tailor to know how to cut and for a cutter to know how to make? Or do you think like, nah, if as long as they communicate well, they don't need to learn each other's kind of like craft as if there is good communication? Or do you think like, no, regardless of communication, a tailor should know the basics of cutting and a cutter should know the basics of tailoring?
I think you can definitely benefit from both ways.
Right.
Especially cutting as well. I think you need to have an understanding of how the garment goes together and all the little things that the tailor does to make it fit the body, because then you can take that into account when cutting as well. So I think it is important to have a basic understanding and for it to go both ways to have a really good end product.
Would you say that there is plenty of opportunities for a tailor to learn cutting during an apprenticeship, or is it like a bit difficult, mate?
Where I was with Edward, like if there was problems, I used to go in and we used to talk about it. Whereas I can imagine that some of the big tailoring houses, you're a coat maker and that's what you're going to learn. You don't need to learn anything else. So I don't know where they would find the opportunity to learn about cutting. So
right.
Yeah, I think it does need to be addressed. I don't know how, but I think also time is a big issue as well, because I think quite a lot of people are rushed through their apprenticeships because they have to do it within a certain time frame. So
yeah,
if they were given a bit more leeway, then possibly they could work with a cutter and spend time. But a lot of the time they have to use their own initiative to go and do stuff like that, don't they? And it's not going to be in work hours, it's going to be in their own time. So I think it's difficult, really.
Yeah. Okay. What was I going to ask? Oh yeah. What did you found the most absolutely dreadful, difficult, impossible thing when you were learning I would say learning in those 10 years, because you had 2 different stages, one is the apprenticeship and one is just fine-tuning things and perfecting everything. What would you say was like the absolute most difficult thing ever for you?
So when I was learning, I struggled to see what the cloth was doing. I was told you'll see it, like you'll get an eye for it. But
so what do you mean what the cloth was doing? Where?
So when you're using it and manipulating it, you kind of look at the grain and you can see what it's doing and where it wants to go, and that's kind of key for a good finished product. But when you're first starting out, you're kind of so overwhelmed with everything, you can't possibly take in any more or see any more. You kind of just got blinkers on for what you've been taught. And then like Henry would say to me, "Oh, can you see what the cloth's doing?" And I'd just be like, no, I can't see what the cloth's doing. Like, what are you talking about? And then after a while, I was just like, oh, like I know what you're talking about. You're not making it up. I can actually see what the cloth's doing. So that was a big thing for me, because I feel like when I hit that stage, things became a lot easier after. And then after, it was definitely sleeves.
Sleeves, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, when I qualified, it was just the point that I would just get so frustrated. And I find with sleeves as well, if you keep sewing, you kind of do go blind to what's going on with the cloth. And sometimes you need to put them down and you come back to them the next day and you'll baste it in once and they'll go in perfectly.
Right.
But when you don't have a lot of experience with sleeves, they can be the most frustrating thing on this planet. And
Mm,
like the armhole run can affect them, and the
mm,
crown and the fullness, and you're just trying to learn so much in one go that
mm.
it's overwhelming. And I just had days where I just like went home and I actually cried because I was so annoyed that I couldn't get it. um yeah, so I went to like a real dark place with sleeves, but I came back
Yeah,
out the other side, and now I'm just like, yeah, bring them on, I'll take it, just give them to
yeah,
me, I'll
yeah.
take them on.
So,
So
so how did you go through that, knowing that, man, whatever I do, it seems just not to work, and it just, I don't know for how long I'm gonna be like this. I don't want to, get jacket after jacket and just like burn out, to ash when I get to the sleeves.
mhm.
What mindset did you have to adapt to be like, just do it, but in a way that you're learning? Like, how did you know this is going to be okay?
I think at some points I didn't, to be honest. I was just like, this is the last stage, and I've come so far, and I know if I'm persistent, eventually it's going to pay off, and I know it's not going to be an overnight thing, and therefore I just have to be patient. And if I am frustrated to the point and I feel like my head's going to explode, I need to put them down and come back to them later.
Right.
And yeah, it like I said, it took me to like quite a dark place with the sleeves, but
Yeah.
when I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel, I
Yeah.
just I just focused and just got on with it. But it was kind of good as well, because when you get to the end of your apprenticeship, you're kind of like, oh yeah, like I know what I'm doing now, like bring it on. And then you get thrown sleeves and you're like, oh my God, I'm absolutely rubbish.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's very painful because you think like, yeah, now I know everything. But okay, so you were there for 10 years, and now you're not there anymore. You're doing freelance work. Um, how do you go from being in a place where the only responsibility you have is the work you're given,
Mhm.
and now changing that, going into maybe, I don't know if I should call it less comfortable, but definitely a different challenge, let's say,
Mhm.
to be like, hey, I'm going to work for maybe multiple houses. I don't know exactly how many jackets or waistcoats I'm going to be making this week, this month,
Mhm.
but I'm willing to take on the risk to go freelance. Like, how do you make that shift? What happens exactly?
Um, well, the way I saw it was, at the time, running the workshop at Sexton's and managing three trainees.
Mm,
I kind of thought, well, obviously it's a big risk to go self-employed, because I have to make sure the money's coming in, because I have a house to pay for and other
yeah.
things to pay for. So that was a bit scary. But then I thought, I have the skills I need to plan the workflow. And
Mm,
if I'm only managing it for me and I can manage the deadlines, that they hopefully won't be changing too much, it should be an easier step for me. So
right.
for me, the main worry was having enough
Okay.
work to keep myself going.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I just made sure before I left I had the contacts I needed and the work coming
Mm,
in, and I was sure that it was the right time for me to take the leap. I mean, it didn't make the decision any easier, and it still was utterly terrifying. But
yeah.
I I kind of forced myself, like, generally, like, my compass, my sense of direction. If something makes me feel uncomfortable, I
Mm,
generally know it's the right thing for me, because it's not because it's the wrong thing, it's just because it's something new. And I'm
yeah.
not great at taking big steps, like stuff. Obviously, like, my start of the tailoring career was a big step, but
Yeah.
when you come that far in tailoring and you're comfortable, it was hard to step out of that circle and just be like,
Mm,
okay, like, this is what I want. So at
yeah.
some point, I'm just going to have to leap for it and do everything I can to make sure it works.
Right, right. What would you say? Um, you said obviously making sure you have enough work for like continuously enough work as a freelance. Um, were there other things that you were like, oh, I thought I don't need to do this, but now I need to do like all these 10 other things as a freelance, which I haven't had any training for or whatsoever.
Um, no, I don't think so. I think my time at Sexton's kind of it set me up for everything I needed, and the only difference really was I then at Sexton's I was kind of part of a team, so
Mm,
I kind of when I went self-employed, I was representing myself. I wasn't
right.
just part of a team. So then the spotlight's very, very much on me and my own work, and I'm responsible for myself. And whereas when I was at Sexton's, I was just part of a
Mm,
team, so I didn't really stand out. So as soon as I went self-employed, I was very aware that how much people were going to be looking at my work and
mm,
judging me to
yeah.
see if I was good enough to work for them. So that's the only thing I did experience was it kind of gave me another check on my confidence as well as
Yeah.
to be like, are you ready for this? Like, is your work good enough? Are people going to want to work with you? So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that was the only thing that I struggled with a bit to start off with, and
Mm,
I'd be working for them and I'd be like they'd be like, oh, thank you so much, like we're really happy with it, and I'd be like, yeah, but what's wrong with it?
mm,
is there is
yeah.
there
Yeah.
is there something like you want me to do differently? And I'm like, no, it's fine. So yeah, I think like the biggest thing was my confidence, because like
Mm,
as I said, I was representing myself. I wasn't just one of like a big team. So
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was difficult for me.
Okay. Okay. So uh, you not only have the responsibility of the work that you're given, but also your own reputation is kind of like what you're
Yeah,
saying there. Right.
yeah.
Right. What would you say? Because this is an interesting part. So if you're working as a tailor in house, then
Hmm.
there are certain things that, hey, if you do these things well, you're not going to get fired, or we're not going to hate you, or you're not going to get shouted at or whatsoever. What are the things as being a freelance tailor that any freelance tailor needs to be able to do well in order to you know work freelance? What would you say are the things that you have experienced so far to be like very essential?
Um, it's it's everything really. You need to
Mm,
make sure that everything you're doing provides an end product that is up to your standards and
mm,
up to what they expect from you, because it's it's very easy to be cut off from someone if they don't
right.
like your work necessarily. They don't have to go to you, oh, we don't like your work.
Mm,
they just won't give you any more work.
right,
So
right.
you
So what
kind
are
of
the top three excuses that a freelance tailor may hear?
um we I don't know, we have no work at the moment for you. I don't know really. um Yeah, I think that's probably the top one. It's just sorry, we're really not very busy at the moment.
Right,
Um,
right, yeah.
like
Whereas they're pumping out
give us a call.
photos.
Yeah, is that, and there's like bundles sitting on the sides.
Right, right.
I don't really know what else I think they could just avoid you. They
Mm.
could just ghost you, couldn't they?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm.
But yeah, it's you're very, like you said, your reputation, like it's everything
Yeah,
when you're self-employed. So you need to make sure that you're not slacking. And I
yeah.
think when you work in house, it's very easy to just sit back and take things easy.
Hmm.
Whereas when you're self-employed, you're under a lot more scrutiny.
Right, right. Would you say that? Well, this is one thing that I've always wondered is that when you're in a small industry and like a tailoring house has only so many orders per month or per year or whatsoever, um, how do freelance tailors make sure that, well, what's the best way to phrase this? So obviously you get work from company X, and maybe two other freelancers get also work from company X.
Yeah.
Um, how do you usually sense, like, what would you say is the relation between the tailors that have all the different works? They don't really work together, but they get work from the same tailoring house. How do companies or the tailors themselves balance that out without starting to become each other's enemies? It's like, hey man, you stole like 20 clients that I was supposed to be working on. Why are you getting all the work now? Does that happen in the freelance kind of like world? And if it does, uh, how does one balance that and manage that?
Well, I don't personally experience it because I'm not in the environment around other freelancers, so
Right,
I'm not aware of the other tailors that are working for the tailors that I'm working for.
right.
Um, but I have heard of situations where you have a lot of freelancers all
Mm,
making coats, for instance, and certain tailors are getting more work than others, and it can cause arguments and
right.
who knows what else. And thankfully, I don't have to deal with that because it would
Yeah.
be a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, the other thing is like, how important would you say communication skills are if you are planning to go self-employed, in order to make sure that you keep the contacts, that you need to keep, but you also are able to communicate. Like one of the things we were talking about before the call was like, um, sometimes freelancers are, when they start out, they're afraid to say, no, I have enough work for this month because they're
Hmm.
scared of not getting any more work. But then
Hmm.
obviously that's not always the case. So what would your advice be for like someone who's planning to go maybe self-employed or is already self-employed and is just starting out to be like, hey, it's going to be okay, don't worry. Like what would you say?
I think if you're making the transition from employed to self-employed, you need to build up your work enough.
Hmm.
So I took jobs on here and there, and then it got to the point where I had too much work in my spare time,
Mm,
and I didn't have enough time to be making it all. So that was the point that I knew that I then had enough work to go self-employed, because if it was building up enough that I didn't have enough hours in the evening
mm,
or after work hours, then it, I needed to take that leap basically and go,
right.
okay, this is the right time for me. Obviously, don't take on one job and go, okay, I've got one job, I'm ready to go self-employed, because if money is an issue for you,
Yeah.
then you need to make sure that you have the work coming in first. Just be
Mm,
sensible.
yeah,
It,
yeah,
it is
yeah.
a difficult balance though, because when you get to the point that you have enough work self-employed,
Mm.
you there isn't enough hours in the day, so you do need to take the leap pretty quickly, because otherwise you're just going to be overwhelmed and exhausted.
Right, right. Do you have any apprentices at the moment?
No, I don't.
Will you have some in the future?
Um, for the foreseeable future, no.
Mm,
I still have some of the people I used to work with that come to me for advice, and
right.
always happy to help them out. So I kind of have partial apprentices, but
Mm,
at the moment I don't have any in my workshop with me at the moment. It's just nice to be able to do my own thing and only
yeah.
be responsible for myself. And I was quite stressed at the end, where I was trying to balance everything and then having all the
Mm,
trainees. So to have so much less responsibility now, I'm
right.
making the most of it.
So would you say that, um, one of the things that made you go from working in-house to freelance was that you wanted to just make more decisions for yourself, manage things more on your own terms, and also have maybe different types of responsibilities. So now, obviously, you're not responsible for like an apprentice or like two other apprentices. You're more thinking about your reputation, the workload for the next few months, etc. Um, or did you think that if you go freelance, you would be able to maybe make more money? What were the things that you were thinking about in making that decision?
Yeah, I think it was like a combination of all those things, really. I
Mm,
wanted, because obviously at Sexton's, I didn't really have my own reputation. I wasn't an individual, so
right,
I did. I wanted to people to see what I was capable of doing.
right.
But I also wanted to be like, I wanted to have the freedom to work as I pleased, really. And if I wanted to do more hours and make more money, I could. Or if I wanted to work less, then that was another possibility. And I just wanted the freedom to choose the hours that I work. And also, a big thing for me was the commute as well,
Right.
because I used to waste about 3 hours a day going to and from London.
That's a
And
lot.
now, yeah, well, it's a lot of time, and now I can invest that time in myself. So I do yoga, and I also walk the dog for 2 hours a day. So whereas that
Right.
time was wasted, well, I saw it as wasted time personally, because
Sure.
sitting on the train staring out a window with other
Yeah.
people that are sweating isn't exactly desirable, is it? So yeah, now I could spend some more time on my mental health and just
Yeah.
generally looking after myself. So it's a big improvement.
Would you say, all things considered, you have a better, well, let's say a better life, work life, let's say, being on your own, and being freelance?
Yeah. It's like night and day, the comparison between the two. For
Right.
me, being freelance is better for me, and it's more
Mm.
suited. It's the lifestyle that I wanted. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's ideal for me. Obviously, it's not for everyone, because some people like to be around people all day long and they enjoy the commute to London. But
Yeah.
that was always things that used to really bug me. So
Hmm.
not necessarily being around people, but
Yeah. Yeah.
the commute to London used to get on my nerves, and it was exhausting. Like by the time you get to work, you're tired. And
Yeah. Yeah.
now my workshop's at the end of the garden, so I have a 1 minute walk to my workshop.
Well, that's a very long time there you have. Yeah. Yeah.
I know. Sometimes I have to take an umbrella if it's raining, if it's a difficult day.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's just like all the external factors as well, like train
Yeah.
delays and angry commuters, and
Mm.
it's just like, for your mental health, it's a lot better to just have the freedom of being freelance, really.
Who would you say shouldn't go freelance?
Um, people that are very, I mean, I am quite happy being by myself all day. I have a dog which keeps me company.
Mm.
And then when I want to socialize, I can go out and socialize. But people that are very sociable in general and
Mm.
like to be around other people,
Right.
it's definitely not a lifestyle for you,
Mm.
because you'll just end up being lonely, and you'll want to go back to the, like,
Right.
if you like. I think also I like the slower pace of working from home as well. But if you're like a more fast paced person and you
Mm.
enjoy the commuting, and like you love London, like
Mm.
I like London, but I didn't like being there all the time. Every time I got on the train home, I was just like, oh, like I can leave it all
Yeah.
behind now.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah.
So it, like, anyone that's very sociable and just loves being around other people and is not
Mm.
very good at being independent, I wouldn't
Yeah.
recommend it.
Okay. 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 Well, how would you say? How would a day? Well, describe one of your days. How does a day of work look for you? What are you like? Do you wake up really early, or do you like? How does it tell us how a day in Claire's life looks like?
Well, it varies a lot. At the moment, I'm really busy, so I'm working a lot more than I normally do. But ideally, I would start work at 9 o'clock,
Okay.
um, work until lunchtime, and then I normally take like a 2 hour lunch break, because I'll go eat my lunch, and then I'll go
Right.
for a walk for an hour,
Yeah.
and then I'll carry on working, work till about 6 o'clock, and
Mm.
then I get to, because I don't have to commute, I get to do yoga, and then I can do dinner, and yeah, it's not a very stressful day anymore. But
Okay.
obviously it varies if I'm busy, because then I have to get up earlier and I end up working later, and as
Mm.
opposed to working 5 days a week, I end up working more. And yeah, but then that's also the joy of being freelance, is you get to decide what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is probably something you're not even concerned with at all. But if tailoring became irrelevant tomorrow and there was no need for a code maker anymore, what would you do? What would you be think? How would you process that? Because you have
Um,
some, because you've built up tailoring skills, and so you have to think of something else. And now, would you try to incorporate some of those skills, or would you think of something else? How would you process that?
I so I did actually reflect upon this during lockdown, because I thought,
Huh.
what would happen if I don't have any more work, and if the
Right.
tailoring industry shrinks a lot. So
Yeah.
I I did joke with a friend that I could stack shelves in Sainsbury's at night time because the pay is really good.
Okay.
But I think I would definitely do something creative. I'm not sure what it would be.
Yeah.
Like I, I, I don't know. I think I would find something that I have an interest in and kind of pursue it from there. I've always been really into like drawing, and that was originally that's what I wanted to do, was to be a fine artist.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Because I have seen some of your drawings, and they're like they look professional, and so, but you wanted to be a painter or something else?
Yeah, just something in fine art. I wasn't exactly sure, but I really enjoyed it. And I think the thing that put me off is quite a lot of it, you have to have really good contacts. And I didn't really know anyone in the
Right.
industry. So I thought,
Right.
well, you're never going to make it big if you don't have the contacts in the first place. And it's a really tough industry to get into. Obviously,
Yeah.
tailoring's kind of similar as well, but
Yeah.
at the time, fine art kind of seemed out of the two the harder one.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe I'd kind of pursue that and see where I ended up. But
Right.
definitely something creative, definitely something that involved movement, because I could never work in an office.
Yeah.
That's why I joke about stacking shelves, because at least that's a physical job as opposed to sitting in front of a computer all day. Like I could
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
do that. So yeah, I don't know. It would be interesting to see the type of person I ended up being. But
Do you think
for
that
now,
the skills you have in well, you've built up in fine arts, let's say drawing and things like that, have they helped you with what you're doing now, or do you see no relation at all?
no, I think it's the creativity, isn't it? It's a transferable skill, and in fine art, you're looking for perfection as well, which is also in tailoring, and I think it is quite closely linked, and it's really rewarding when things turn out how you wanted them to,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think they are very close, which probably if I wanted to go into fine art, I'd probably drive myself crazy trying to perfect drawing, because
Yeah.
having not done a lot over the last few years, I'd be like starting as an apprentice all over again.
Right. Yeah. 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 Okay. Okay. Well, Claire, I think I have one more question for you. I mean, I could go on for like hours talking, but I have one more question. Everybody who's seen your work knows that you are far beyond capable of pretty much making everything, but it didn't happen just overnight. And so I'm sure you've had a lot of moments where you had to make a lot of mistakes and fix them again and kind of like go through all the difficulties. What would you say is one of your most memorable mistakes, or perhaps even the most disastrous, if you have any, that you can share with us?
I have, when I was an apprentice, I made a massive hole in some expensive cloth, and like the first time I did it more than once, and the first time I did it, I was absolutely devastated.
I like the part where you said I did it more than once. It was like,
well, the thing is, when you're an apprentice and you're under pressure and you're mark stitching and you don't have a lot of time, you kind of
yeah,
you're constantly pushing yourself, aren't you?
yeah,
So
yeah,
every
yeah,
so often, like if your concentration slips for just that second, you've got a nice triangle in the cloth, right? And it's always in the place that is like you can't move the cloth, you can't move the pattern. So
yeah, yeah,
like, oh wow. But yeah, I've made loads of mistakes. Like I'm far from perfect, and
yeah,
but that's the thing with tailoring is you have a problem, but you have to learn how to fix it. Like
yeah,
it, and also when you do learn how to fix it, it's really rewarding. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I'm far from perfect and
Mm.
still make mistakes, but it's just learning how to deal with them and to not have a meltdown.
Yeah, yeah, because I think that's one of the things that I personally noticed once I got kind of like started out and went through whatever I was going through was that um, there is a lot of times that you get really angry with the work, and it's like you just want to like tear the whole thing apart. And if you don't manage to balance that and be like, relax, leave it there, come back in 2 hours or whatsoever, if you don't do that, then you probably will die at a very young age. No, really, and so I've noticed that once I mastered a little bit of that and be like, just take it easy, leave it, whatever. It affected other parts in my life as well. And so when something happens, it's just you have a different view. You view it as in like, oh, just leave it there for like 2 hours and then whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you feel the same?
Yeah, I think that's key. Like, the more frustrated you get, the less likely you are to achieve what you want to achieve. So you
Yeah.
do have to know when to stop and know how far you can push yourself and be like, okay, yeah, I'm going to put this down and I will come back to it later because
Yeah.
I need to sleep, or I like going for a walk is amazing. You can solve so many problems whilst walking. So
Yes,
that's one of
yes.
the things I do. But yeah, it's knowing how far to push yourself, because you don't gain anything out of it. Like, if you stopped, go for a walk, come back and start it, you'll find that it would be a lot easier. Whereas if you spend the next 3 hours trying to fix whatever it is or trying to
Yeah.
make whatever it happen, you're not going to gain anything, and you're going to come back the next day and look at it and be like, well, that's rubbish. So then
Yeah.
you're going to have to do it again anyway. So you
Yeah.
benefit a lot from just putting it down and coming back to it later.
Makes 100% sense. Okay, well, Claire, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I wish we had more time, but I'm sure that in a few months' time, we can get together again and talk about maybe other topics, because there is so much to discuss. I would like to thank you for your time, and I look forward to see more of your work. And yeah, we'll keep in touch. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. And that was Claire. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation. If you'd like to see more from Claire, you can find the links to her Instagram and her website in the description of this video. Now, we didn't mention this one thing, but it's important for me to mention this, that Claire does also do one-to-one tuition. So if you'd like to know more about that, simply visit her website or send her a direct message on Instagram. If you have any thoughts or comments, please let us know, and we sure hope to see you again soon in the next episode. Until then, bye-bye.